Let's go over muscle endurance. So what is muscle endurance? It's sustained contractions over a long period of time. Some examples would be push-ups to fatigue or timed push-ups, timed sit-up testing, timed lunges, timed isometric positions. So if you did the plank for 30 seconds to a minute, that would be considered muscle endurance. We also need to talk about adenosine triphosphate. So you have the adenine group and 3 phosphates. And those 3 phosphates are held together by high energy covalent bonds. And when broken, they release energy. So you go from a high energy state to a low energy state when that energy is released. But what's important for this class is just know that ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is our chemical energy. So that's what we're trying to make when we break down glucose. So glycolysis is breaking down glucose, and you can have 2 different types of glycolysis. You can have anaerobic glycolysis or aerobic glycolysis. So if we're doing muscle endurance activities, we're breaking down glucose to generate ATP, but it doesn't create as much ATP as you can aerobically, because we're not using oxygen at this point to break down glucose, or we're not using oxygen in this process. And eventually, if those contractions go too long, we'll produce lactic acid. We'll have to stop. There's just not enough energy here. But pyruvic acid can enter the Krebs cycle and eventually out through the electron transport chain, and you can generate ATP that way. So anaerobic glycolysis happens in the cytosol of the cell, if you wanted to know where this is all going down. And then aerobic glycolysis happens within the mitochondria of the cell. So energy systems, time, and work. The 3 major energy systems we use during exercise are not independent of one another. They all work. It all depends on how much work we're doing and how fast we're doing it. So if I go and sprint and it's going to be an all-out effort, then I'm going to use the phosphagen system or the ATP-CP system to generate my ATP. And it's not going to last very long. Normally about 10 or 12 seconds, but sometimes it can go a little longer than that. It all depends on the intensity of the activity. But for muscle endurance, not only do we use the ATP-CP system, but we also use glycolysis to generate our ATP. But again, that has a time limit. If those contractions are sustained over a long period of time, they're going to be too intense for us to have enough energy to keep going. So eventually we'll fatigue. Anything over about 2 minutes or so that's sustained, but it's not a very high intensity, we can use the aerobic oxidative energy system to keep us going. So as you can see, they're not independent of each other. Just to get us going, we'll use the ATP-CP system, then glycolysis, and as long as it's not too intense, eventually the aerobic oxidative energy system will kick in and supply our energy needs. But they all 3 work in tandem. It just depends on the intensity. If the intensity is too high, we never get to use the other energy systems. But the one we're talking about is glycolysis. So fast twitch oxidative glycolytic muscle. So that is muscle endurance. 5 muscle fibers that you would recruit. If all you ever did was muscle endurance activities, you're going to have a higher percentage of this type of fast twitch, this type of fast twitch muscle. So I've put up a chart. We're not going to go through all of these. Let's just talk about the type 2A fibers. Those are the muscle endurance fibers. So they're moderately fast, the contraction time. The motor neurons, medium in size. And then resistance to fatigue is fairly high, not as high as slow twitch. And then activities best for long-term anaerobic, so greater than anything less than 30 minutes. Really, I mean, if we're talking about push-ups, nobody's going to get anywhere close to 30 minutes. Or lunges. You're not going to sit there and do lunges straight for 30 minutes. Typically right around 2 to 3 minutes. Medium power production. get a lot of mitochondrial density in the cells. And then capillary density is intermediate. It's high with slow twitch, so that way you can get a lot of blood supply to it. Oxidative capacity is high, so you have a lot of myoglobin, a lot of red blood cells getting to that area. And if you looked at it underneath a microscope, it's going to be really dark in color, not as dark as slow twitch. Glycolytic capacity is high. I mean, that's how we get our energy systems. The creatine phosphate gets us going, but glycolysis kicks in and it supplies most of our energy systems. And then here are the human genes associated with those muscle fiber types. So if you didn't do any training at all, the average person, and this does vary based on genetics, but if we're just looking on average, most people are 50-50 that don't train. 50% fast twitch, 50% slow twitch. If you do a lot of long distance running, you're going to be 30% fast twitch, 70% slow twitch. Now notice we're not comparing fast twitch oxidative glycolytic to fast twitch glycolytic. There's no comparison here. So when they're talking about fast twitch, they're talking about big, bulky, explosive muscle. If you're an elite sprinter, you're going to have a lot more fast twitch glycolytic. Very little slow twitch. And if you're a weightlifter or a power lifter, you're going to have a lot of fast twitch, but you'll also have some slow twitch. Let's talk a little bit about blood pH and lactic acid. If you don't work out a lot and you decide to do a muscle endurance program, you may have noticed that you've gotten nauseous after doing a lot of repetitions. It's because your body's not adapted to that much lactic acid being built up, and it gets out into your bloodstream and it drops the pH in your blood, and that can make you sick. So normal blood pH is about 7.2, 7.3. If it drops much below that, the fastest way your body can get you back to homeostasis is to lose a lot of acid really quick. So you have a lot of acid in your stomach, and so you throw that up, body's able to get rid of a lot of acid and balance it out. But if you do a lot of muscle endurance activities, your body will compensate and start to store more buffer within the muscle, so that when you do those muscle endurance activities, it can buffer and keep your blood pH normal and you won't feel nauseous. pH and enzymes. If your pH drops really low, your enzymes don't function properly, and it will denature a protein just like high temperature will. So if you've ever fried an egg, that egg white has a lot of protein, is all protein. And if you've ever seen it go from clear to white, which you probably have, that's denaturing of that protein, meaning that the substrate can no longer bind to it, and so the enzyme will no longer function. But acid will do the same thing. You can throw an egg into vinegar and it will denature that protein as well. So if that happens in your body, pH drops too low, your body can't function normally. So let's talk about buffers. Can you supplement with buffers? Yes, you can. For a long time, people try to do it with sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda, which is what your body produces to buffer lactic acid. And so they would try to take it orally and it would make them really sick. But then they found that there's an amino acid, beta-alanine, and when ingested, it's eventually converted to a dipeptide, and it can be used as an intracellular buffer. But you can't take carnosine in orally. It doesn't work that way. You have to take this amino acid, and it can work. Muscle endurance testing. So in this class, when you did your pre-testing, you did push-ups to fatigue, or sit-ups to fatigue, or lunges, well, sit-ups for 1 minute, lunges for 1 minute. You could also have done an isometric plank, but we don't have a lot of normative data, not as much as we do on push-ups, sit-ups, and lunges. So protein intake for muscle endurance athletes, they have a much higher protein requirement than most athletes, even than people that do weight training. So American College of Sports Medicine and other organizations recommends for muscle endurance athletes that they take in 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight for muscle endurance athletes. These are the higher number is for extreme muscle endurance athletes, so people running like the Spartan race, really doing like long distance races where it requires a lot of muscle endurance. Adventure racing is really what I was trying to think of. Requires a lot of protein to help repair those muscles so that you don't have body wasting or muscle wasting where your body goes after muscle. So you need to spread out your protein intake through the day. I can't take in all my protein in one meal because then I'll just be peeing away my money and it'll be really hard on my kidneys. You could take in about 20 to 30 grams at a time. And if you're an endurance athlete, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe about 30, 35. But I wouldn't take in any more than that. So if you look at these protein supplements and you're taking in 70 grams at a time, you're just wasting your money if you're doing that. Now, if you took that, cut it in half, and waited about 2 hours between each meal, then that would be sufficient. And your body could use most of that protein.